Fernando Alonso.
Just mentioned him.
Yes, remember him? Of course, we cannot forget the man here. So, interestingly enough, he's apparently targeting a return to Formula One at least next year, so 2021. And he says he's confident that he will win the championship if given the right car. His quote is, "I'm not done with F1. 2021 is a good opportunity and I feel fresh and ready now. It's something I will explore." So before we get into if this is even a possibility, if it makes sense what you tell him, I mean, I guess you guys can just recap the situation as to why he's where he is.
Yeah, so Fernando is a two-time world champion. He won his championships in 2005, 2006, which
It's
now
crazy when you say how long ago it was.
I know.
seems a
I was
lifetime
like,
away.
what?
With Renault, who have come and gone from the grid once in that period as well. And he then went to McLaren, where he had a very famous year up against Lewis, in which the two of them really clashed, and they clashed, well, Fernando clashed with Ron Dennis, who was running McLaren at the time, again putting all this in the historical perspective it needs. And then he went to Ferrari. It looked like that was going to be the perfect partnership, the perfect place for him, and it didn't quite click. He came twice close to winning championships in 2010 and 2012. Didn't come off. And then when the Ferrari relationship started to degrade, he went back to McLaren, who had just secured a deal with Honda. Of course, Honda, who we're talking about earlier in the podcast, now with Red Bull, things are going well. Well, this was Honda just as they'd come back into Formula One and were faced with some incredibly complex engine regulations that they couldn't quite get their head around. And so the engine in the back of Fernando's car, and in fact the car itself, weren't up to scratch, and as a result he didn't even get on a podium in his time back with McLaren, which ended in 2018, by which point he looked thoroughly fed up with F1, and he didn't...
He needed that relationship break.
He definitely... That was a relationship break that was vital to think everyone's well-being. But he pointed out quite recently that he didn't say goodbye to F1 then. He basically said, "See you later," and that was important, and it's certainly important to him now because he's looking at getting back. And since then, he's gone off and he's attempted to win the Indy 500. He tried that actually first of all in 2017 while he's still in F1, didn't quite pull it off. He went back again with McLaren, and it was an ill-fated kind of relationship, well, not relationship, but an ill-fated venture that didn't get past qualifying. However, he has won the Le Mans 24 Hours twice in that time, and he recently took part in the Dakar Rally, which is one of the most insane rallies or kind of actually sporting events you can do in the world. If you haven't seen it before, check it out on YouTube. It's just bonkers what those guys do. So he's done all these other things, but at the back of his mind, it's clear that he still wants to come back to Formula One, and so
It's his number one bae.
That's it. And you know,
Boo.
and that third world championship. And in the meantime, he's seen Sebastian Vettel become a 4-time world champion. He's seen Lewis become a 6-time world champion. And I think he has a huge amount of respect for Lewis, having driven against him. Yeah. I think he maybe has less respect for Sebastian Vettel, and yet he's 2 championships behind him in the history books. And he wants to come back and show everyone that he's still the greatest driver, which arguably he is.
But that's the whole point of the Triple Crown he's been trying to win. Was he was like, I can't prove it in Formula One. I don't have the tools to, so I'm going to go and prove it elsewhere. And yeah, so that's been his whole MO since he left. Well, since he 2017 did the Indy 500. Since then, it's been like, okay, I'll win all these other events, show everyone how great I am. And yeah, I think this is the next part of the conversation. Is I think we'll all agree he's a fantastic driver.
Yeah.
It's where does he go? Because the worst thing about his career was, so the last bit of his career was just seeing Fernando Alonso fighting for 14th or 13th. It just wasn't. Say what you want about him on a personal level. Some people like him, some people don't. But a driver that good should be at the front of the grid. Yeah. And it was just, if he comes back, it wouldn't be. He wouldn't want to do it. He wouldn't want to have anything other than a car that can win races. And this is where we get onto the frustrating thing about Alonso, is that he's burnt so many bridges in his career. You know, so we're talking about the Indy 500. He currently can't do the Indy 500. Racer magazine recently broke this story. Honda have basically vetoed him doing the Indy 500 in a Honda-powered car. And that's all from the comments he made when he was at McLaren. So if he did come back, Red Bull would probably already off the table anyway, but they're not going to take him. I don't think Ferrari would go near him again. They've invested the future in Leclerc. I'm sure he would love Toto Wolff to call him tomorrow and say, hey, Fernando, what are your plans next year? But Toto Wolff's quite a pragmatist, and I don't think, unless Lewis did leave, that might be an option. But he's not. Toto Wolff is never going to put Fernando Alonso in the same team as Lewis Hamilton. So then what do you do? Do you go back to McLaren? Do you hope that they get the rules right? Do you go to Renault, who might not even stay in F1 next year? You know, I mean, they wouldn't sign him if they didn't, but there's not even certainty they're staying in. So it's hard to get excited about the story.
It's a tricky one, and I think all the teams deep down might be quite tempted, maybe apart from Honda. But I think all the teams deep down might be quite tempted, and I think Ferrari.
His name carries weight.
His name carries weight, and they know either firsthand or they've heard just how good he is. And the one thing that Fernando did to endear himself to the teams that he raced against, he didn't do that all the time, but the one thing he consistently did was when he took that car out on track, he would get every last bit of performance out of it. And so more frustrating than anything, I think, for a team is when you know you've got a pretty good car, but the driver out there is letting you down or putting it in the barriers. And Fernando, above anybody else, I would say, is going to get the very best out of it consistently. So there's that temptation, and you never know. I mean, I agree with everything that Nate said earlier. With Ferrari, you kind of think, well, different management to the one that he left. Maybe, I don't know what the relationship was like with Mattia Binotto, but Binotto was at the team at the time. So was he an ally of Alonso or not? I don't know. I genuinely don't. But that could be an interesting thing to explore for him.
Do you get the impression that a lot of Ferrari fans would welcome him back, you know, with open arms? And often that can have quite a bit of weight on what a team does with a decision like that. You know, I feel like a lot of them think, well, we have unfinished business with Alonso.
To go back a little bit on what I just said, perhaps the only other indication of the Alonso-Ferrari relationship was in Milan last year when Ferrari was celebrating 90 years of their existence as a racing team, and they got all the old drivers back together and they put them on stage in the centre of Milan, but one driver who wasn't there was Fernando Alonso, and I don't know the exact reasons, but you never know. It seemed like the kind of thing that he probably should have attended. Of course, he was a McLaren ambassador at the time, but I'm sure he could have gone on in plain clothes and it wouldn't have been an issue. So I don't know. Maybe
undercover Alonso.
Undercover Alonso.
Moustache,
and he would have been, as you said, would have been very welcomed by the fans. But maybe that relationship isn't quite there. But we will see. It would be so interesting to find out whether he can find a way back in.
Well, he spoke about the rules reset that, of course, I know you wrote a lengthy article on. I tried to read it and understood everything, almost everything, but we digress.
That's just my writing.
That's just his penmanship.
Speaking in the car when we're driving. That's terrible.
Exactly. Well, he spoke about the rules reset and how that could possibly work in his favour. So just in layman's terms, just what is it and how do you see if it could at all work in his favour if he is, welcomed back, as you said?
Okay, so in 2021, the Formula 1 cars that you see on track are going to look very different. That's because they're going to be built to a new set of regulations, and those new set of regulations are designed to allow them to race closer with each other, and they're also designed to bring the field close together, so the likes of McLaren and Renault may stand a better chance of winning races than they do right now. That sounds great, doesn't it? It sounds like if he did come back, he could get in a car and it might not have to be one of the top three teams and he could still challenge for race wins and maybe a championship and rely more on his own natural talent. And that's what he's arguing. And you can see the logic there. The only thing is that history tells us that when we have major changes in regulations, and we've had a few in the last kind of 10 years or so, we had one in 2017 when the cars became a lot wider. We had one in 2014 when they changed the engine underneath the engine cover, and that had a big impact, and it kicked off Mercedes' current period of domination. And we had one in 2009, which is quite famously remembered for Brawn's single year, where they went and won both championships because they basically got a much better understanding of the regulations early on and got a head start. So the history of Formula 1 suggests that actually major regulation changes don't bring the field closer together. They tend to spread it apart. These ones are slightly different, as in that they've been more controlled by the FIA in Formula 1, so the teams don't have the same kind of freedom that brought about some of those examples of domination after regulation changes in previous years. But I'm still sceptical. I still think you have to back the right horse, and that's true for all drivers. We know Leclerc's already gone with Ferrari. We know that Max has already gone with Red Bull. But that's true for all drivers as they look at it. And really for Fernando, it's going to be a big leap of faith if he wants to come back to Formula 1 and doesn't end up in one of those top three teams, because the other ones he's relying on them nailing those regulations and moving to the front, and that's a big ask for any team. And
the thing that always follows Alonso is people say he's always made pretty bad career decisions. Obviously, he always says, I never had a crystal ball. That's the one thing he always said. But it would follow that trend if he came back and committed to a team that then completely made a hash of those regulations, you'd almost be like, well, it's kind of a fitting way for a really frustrating career to end, because he always seems to end up in either the wrong place or be there a year too early or a year too late or whatever. So
Alonso back in 2021, you two not feeling it.
I would love it.
I mean, we'd love it for the theory and for who he is, but
for the sport, it would be great if he was back and he was winning races, but it's just so hard to see where. And I think Formula One, we might differ on this.
After 2021?
No, I think it's got to be next year.
It's got to be next year.
If he waits a year, then if he waits a year and say Max goes and wins the championship, or Leclerc goes and wins the championship, it feels like it's a new era anyway. Mm-hmm. And this is his chance, like we said with the rules reset. It's then or never, I would say. And beyond then as well, he might be doing something else. He might be trying to win the Indy 500 for the 5th time or, or like the 5th attempt or whatever. So
there we go. All right. So sorry, Fernando. Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content plus live streaming, make sure to subscribe to ESPN Player.